Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you had a lovely lunch. Please join me in welcoming our webcast viewers. Again, my name is Andrew Graham. I'm president of the Canadian Club of Toronto and very pleased to be your host for today. Viewers, thank you for joining us. Each season, the Canadian Club proudly provides a forum for leaders from every aspect of society to share their thoughts and ideas with us. And we would not be able to do that without an important set of sponsors that help us put these events on. I'd like to take a moment to thank today's sponsors. They are Archer Daniels Midland Company, represented by Christopher Cuddy, Lunia, represented by Joseph Mancinelli, Norton Rose Fulbright, represented by Walid Soliman, and Power Corporation of Canada, represented by Paul Genet. I'd also like to acknowledge the partnership that we have today with the Toronto Sun, which has been important for putting today's event on. We're going to hear from Adrian in a few minutes. Please also join me in warmly welcoming our youth and young leaders here from C.W. Jeffries Collegiate Institute. Where are you, youth and young leaders? Over here. Welcome. Their participation has been supported by Power Corporation as well. We're thrilled to have you here. We're glad to offer our audience in the room and those on the webcast and Facebook live captioning. This is a new addition for us this season, one we're excited about. We're grateful to AI Live for helping us make events like this more accessible for everybody. And now, our program and our honored guest. Each season, we identify a candidate for our Lifetime Achievement Award. The criteria is pretty simple. A Canadian of distinguished character whose efforts and leadership over their lifetime have directly improved the lives of Canadians, promoted the image of Canada, and served as a positive model for others to follow. I'm sure you will all agree we could not have someone more deserving than Canada's 18th Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Brian Mulroney. There's so much that can be said here, but I know I need to keep the introduction brief, so I'll just go over some highlights. And I'm sure Adrian will dive more into many of the accomplishments that have marked the life of Prime Minister Mulroney. 35 years ago, he led the Progressive Conservative Party to their largest victory in Canadian history. In 1989, he was re-elected with a majority government, becoming the first Canadian Prime Minister in 35 years to win successive majority governments, and the first Conservative Prime Minister to do so in 100 years. Prime Minister Mulroney guided Canada through many challenges, from the Cold War and apartheid abroad to economic and social transformation at home. Decisions he and his government took then have proven crucial to our prosperity today. To name just one, the Canada-US Free Trade Agreement has shaped Canada and helped us grow in many ways. And I think the impacts have gone beyond economics. As former Privy Council Clerk Kevin Lynch noted, free trade with the US got us as Canadians to believe in ourselves, to take down the tariff barriers and think we could compete with the world's largest and most competitive economy and do well at it. And I said sort of two thoughts reflecting on that. First of all, we hope the Toronto Raptors take those thoughts as well. And Prime Minister, without wanting to diminish that accomplishment at all, for it's a truly remarkable accomplishment, the U.S. government of your era does seem perhaps less complex or less hard to understand perhaps than the U.S. government of today. So we look forward to hearing from you on that, as well as we know you'll have many insights. There are so many other ways that Prime Minister Mulroney has shaped the Canada we know today. I mentioned apartheid earlier, for example, and I know we'll hear more about many of these topics from the discussion that's to follow. In 1993, after 9 years as Prime Minister, he left government and rejoined the Montreal law firm of Norton Rose Fulbright as senior partner. His leadership has been brought to bear on a number of corporate boards and charities. These include serving as chairman of the board of directors of Power Corporation and Quebecer. The former Prime Minister is also a trustee of the Montreal Heart Institute Foundation and the International Advisory Board of the Business School HEC in Montreal. He's also the recipient of many honors and awards. These include Canada's highest honor, the Companion of the Order of Canada, and the highest honor of the Government of Quebec, Grand Officier de l'Ordre National du Québec. Mr. Mulroney, with his wife Mila and our parents, are four impressive Canadians, most of whom have joined us today. We're so glad you're here to help us celebrate. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming to the Canadian Club podium the 2018 Lifetime Achievement Award recipient, the Honourable Brian Mulroney, joined in conversation with Adrian Batra, Editor-in-Chief of the Toronto Sun, and another accomplished Canadian.
Whoops. There we are.
Good afternoon, everyone. Our 18th Prime Minister of Canada is sitting here with us at a very unique time in our world. So it's quite befitting that you are being presented with the Lifetime Achievement Award. And I just, on a personal note, want to say what an honor and a pleasure it is to be with you. My parents very much remember when you became Prime Minister, and they're from out west, so you can imagine how they felt about the Prime Minister before you. So this is quite an honor and a pleasure. Just to sort of pick up on what Andrew, our president of the Canadian Club, was saying, everybody wants to know one thing in this room. I think it's really important. Raptors in 6?
I would say 5.
Oh. That's a bold prediction. We're going to hold you to that.
That's not a bold prediction. Well, when I ran, I thought I was going to win. That was a bold prediction.
I think there's a lot of other people that thought the same. One of the things that, of course, you're known for is NAFTA, the free trade agreement, and under what you've seen today, now the USMCA. How do you think Canada handled that negotiation?
Well, just before I answer that, it occurs to me when I see a great crowd like this, a warm welcome, one thought invariably goes through my mind, and it is it too late for a comeback? I remember once watching television with Mila a number of years ago, and one of my successors was in Israel on a mission. And at a press conference in Jerusalem on a Saturday, they said, well, Prime Minister, what's the Canadian position on the Arab-Israeli conflict? And the Prime Minister of Canada said, don't ask me. I don't even know if I'm in North, South, East, or West Jerusalem. I said to Mila, who's sitting right here, I said, this guy is so bloody bad that I'm going to get myself reelected leader of the party and I'm going to become Prime Minister again. And there was total silence. So I said, looked at Mila and I said, did you hear me, dear? And she said, oh, I heard you all right. I said, well, what do you think? She said, I think it's a wonderful idea. And I know your new wife is really going to love the experience. So to get to NAFTA, I think that the NAFTA file was well handled by the government in difficult circumstances. And while not perfect, it's as good as anybody could do in these circumstances. The key to it was getting the deal in the first place, which is what I indicated to the Prime Minister when he came to see me and asked me if I would advise the government in their negotiations with this new government in the United States. So it was a rough thing, but I think the government held firm on what mattered, and in the crunch, Canada got what it wanted, and we've got a good deal. This stuff about, you heard about NAFTA being the worst disaster in history coming from Washington was, of course, nonsense. And now the same guy says NAFTA's fabulous. Mm-hmm. Well, that's nonsense too, because there's not much difference between the NAFTA that I signed 35 years ago and the NAFTA today, except for the modernization features, which are very important. Look, NAFTA today, if you want its importance to Canada, NAFTA has become, from the time I signed the Canada-United States Free Trade Agreement with Ronald Reagan, then NAFTA with Bush, President Bush. Today, NAFTA represents 3 countries with 500 million people, and with approximately 7% of the world's population, we have achieved 29% of the world's total wealth. We've created 52 million jobs, including millions in Canada. And it has become the largest and richest and most dynamic free trade zone in the history of the world. So, Adrian, as you can see, the key to this, and I told the Prime Minister, don't ever respond to any of the tweets or the insults or anything. Let them all go by. And prepare, prepare, prepare. Because in the end, what is important is not whether you get clause A or B or C, so you get it done.
That's right.
You've got to have NAFTA, because NAFTA represents a majority of the economic backbone of this country, the millions of jobs here in Ontario. And you have to have it. If you lose this, you're going to lose a lot of things. So I think he did a pretty good job on that, and they held firm, as I say, where we had to. And I think it's going to grow and prosper, irrespective of what you hear about the Mexicans these days. And I mean, how do you like that? You sign. Well, the trade between our 3 countries is $1.4 trillion a year, just the trade. 1.4 trillion between 3 countries. That leaves 197 other countries in the world to do business with. No wonder the 3 economies are booming the way they are. And we can't shut that down.
That's right.
Or allow anybody to shut it down for us. And because I tell you, how would you like to be? When I fought the free trade election in 1988, and it was a tough election, as Paul, who was there, and Ernie, and people will remember. When I fought that, I mean, it was brutal. At one point, my support was down to members of my immediate family.
Some of which are here.
Yeah, and I remember calling my mother during the election, and she put me on hold. And I was paying for the call. So this was pretty rough going. And had we lost that election, then what we would have lost was free trade, NAFTA, and the tax issues, including the GST. NAFTA and the GST made it possible for the Chrétien government to eliminate the deficit and pay down the part of the national debt. Don't take it from me. That comes from Paul Martin and John, what's his name? Nice guy, who was the Minister of Finance as well. So it means a great deal to Canada, and we can't let it go. We've got to build on it.
All right, let's stay in the sphere of what's happening right now, and then I want to dive into the things of then in the time in which you were Prime Minister and how it's relevant. One of the things that one of the people you often quote is Mario Cuomo, and you say that you campaign in poetry and you govern in prose. Do you think that the current Prime Minister understands that?
Sorry, I didn't hear that. I think he looks at life a hell of a lot differently from the day he was sworn in, when he was talking about primroses and
Sunny ways?
Sunny ways. You don't see much of that. That's just the reality of governing. That's just the reality of what happens. It always looks easier from the outside, and it never is, particularly if you're going to make change. They had wanted to bring in changes to our electoral system, that would have been on a level with free trade. That would have been a massive change in Canada. But they canned it. It didn't work. That was a big one gone down. They said that they were going to do some significant other things, and they never occurred, but some did. So their management of the economy has been like Mr. Harper's has been good, the management of the economy. The big ticket items have been few and far between. The visionary items, as I've often said in quoting the Old Testament, that young men have visions and old men dream dreams. Well, that's why they're there, these younger people. I see Peter MacKay here, and he was one of the visionaries of what happened some decades ago. In fact, I might as well say today, people talk about Stephen Harper, giving him credit for uniting the Conservative Party. Wrong. You can't unite a party with yourself. You got to unite with somebody. The guy he united with was Peter MacKay. He's the one who did it. So I think, and then you saw what happened with this stuff with Judy, the Minister of...
Jody Wilson-Raybould.
Yeah, well, shows how close to things I...
We just call her JWR.
I see, well, okay. Well,
Yeah, she's got her own acronym now.
look, I kind of felt sorry for him because, no government is perfect. Well, with the exception of mine, probably. And so you get caught up in these things. This one has bounced very badly against the government. And while there are no indictments or charges or what have you, they've bungled the communications of this very badly. I'm not saying that's certainly not the Prime Minister's fault, but they bungled it, the government bungled it very badly. And of course, with the two women leaving the cabinet, that doesn't make for a very happy Women's Liberation Day, especially if you're the guest speaker, as he was. So all this to say that he's learned the truth, as we all do, of Mario Cuomo's famous dictum: you campaign in poetry, but you govern in prose. It's a different world.
Let's talk about the person that wants to replace him come October, Andrew Scheer, for a moment. When you became Prime Minister, you inherited one of the largest deficits the country has ever seen.
The largest.
The largest.
From Pierre Trudeau.
8.2%, I believe.
8.7%.
8.7.
Of GDP.
Of the GDP. The biggest this country has ever seen.
That's right.
And you've described it as when you go campaign, you want to do amazing things for Canadians, you want to promise things, you want to give them health care, you want to give them infrastructure, you want to give them education, you want to do all these great things. But you called it the golden handcuffs. Because once you see that the cupboard is bare, which is exactly what they did to your government, you can't do that. You can't give the Canadian public, all the things that you've promised them to do. I put that in the context of what we're sort of seeing across the world and frankly in Canada right now. A lot of governments are changing hands, so to speak, from one political stripe to the other for a particular reason. Big grand promises made. Generally, conservative governments have to come in and fix the mess. You were advising Prime Minister, a Prime Minister Scheer come October, potentially. What would you tell him to do?
Don't.
Your son
You're
Mark told me
swearing
you weren't
in,
going
why
to give
don't
me
you
one-word
decline?
answers.
Look, it's we don't know what's going to happen, and trying to predict election campaigns 5 or 6 months out. Look, when I ran the first time, I was on the day the election was called by Prime Minister Turner. I was 14 points behind. I won by 22. The second one, I was in third place, not second. I was in third place. And I wound up in first place again with another huge majority. So you can't elections matter. So you can't try and predict in advance what is going to happen. But this is going to be a tight one.
Yes.
This is going to be a tight one. And Sam Wakeham is here, my old roommate at college and my friend. Sam always used to say, the best bird dog in Toronto in terms of, if you want to know what's going on in the streets of Toronto for elections, talk to Sam. And he used to say, sometimes in elections, you win by not losing. Think of it. You win by not losing. And here we have a situation where if Scheer is lucky, he can win by not losing. He doesn't have to be the second coming. That's dangerous. You know, Justin was the first coming last time, and what happens is expectations build against you. And I think, you know, Emile and I have known Justin Trudeau since he was 2 years old, and he's developed into a fine young man. He's very competent, great campaigner, and a competent man. And you know, he's too far to the left for me, but a lot of people are. You know.
I'm the editor of The Sun, and I'm sitting on your left right now.
You know, what am I going to do? You know? So I think that like, you know, Ontario, you know, here they have the same situation. I mean, it's hard to believe that this was the engine of Canadian prosperity for all those years, with my years of Robarts and Bill Davis and Mike Harris and Ernie and so on, and now we're receiving equalization payments from Newfoundland and Labrador, Ontario. And why is that? Because somebody got in there and spent almost to the point where Pierre Trudeau did with us in the federal level and racked up the biggest deficit in history. Can you imagine a province of Ontario having a deficit of $18 billion and a debt, provincial debt of $394 billion, larger than the state of California, and California's got 40 million people? This has never happened before. So in comes the Ford government with the duty, the moral duty, to clean this thing up. And as soon as you start cleaning it up, the same people who created it say, look at these crazy conservatives, these right-wing reactionaries. They're cutting things out. They're doing this. They're doing this. Well, for God's sake, get over it. Get over it. It has to be done. I mean, we did it federally, and they said I was going to get killed in the next election. They were almost right. But I didn't get killed. We got reelected. People, I'll tell you what will happen here, I think. What will happen anywhere. What people are looking for is not perfection. They're looking for leadership.
That's right.
For leadership. And what is perceived as tough action today, unacceptably unpopular action today, 2 years from now can be viewed as leadership. When they, I mean, look, I go around the streets of Toronto or anywhere, say, thank God, Prime Minister, for NAFTA, and thank God for the GST and so on. I'm saying to myself, where the hell were you 20 years ago?
That's right.
Probably throwing tomatoes at me with a lot of other people. So you got to go through this stuff. If you want to be popular, that's one thing. And you can be popular. You can play a lot of golf as Prime Minister of Canada, not doing a damn thing. But people think you are because the media gins this stuff up. But 25 years later, when you've left, and historians look at your record and they say, hey, what the hell did he do? What were his achievements while he was there? And that's when the chickens come home to roost. If you've taken the tough decisions, you've got something to at least argue about. If you haven't, you will be discarded to the dustbin of history as one of those prime ministers who had an opportunity but chose to be popular rather than right. And that's what leadership is all about. Bill Clinton said, and I had the privilege of serving with President Reagan and President Bush and President Clinton, and they were all great people. And Clinton said one day, leadership is the capacity to look around the corner of history just a little bit. Well, we looked around the corner of history on free trade, on NAFTA, on Nelson Mandela,
That's right.
on tax reform, and on all these things. And what we saw, if we didn't act, was catastrophe. Mm-hmm. The Ethiopian famine. Brian Stewart from the CBC has written publicly, who was there, that Canada's leadership saved 700,000 lives directly in the famine at the beginning of our mandate. You know, they don't put up statues to you for that. But when you look at your own record, that's important, that people never be forgotten, and people less well off than Canadians never be forgotten. And we use Canada's strength and our riches for good in the world. We tried to do that. We didn't make it all the time, but we tried to do that.
But you also were at the forefront, and it was an unpopular position at the time, when your government stood up against apartheid in Africa and said that we needed to use sanctions in order to do that. You also stood up for Israel.
Yep.
Very strong support for Israel, which again, doesn't win you a lot of friends in certain parts of the world. Do you find that our foreign relations now is better, is worse? It's very different, to be sure. But how are we positioned in the world now?
Well, we're going to find out pretty fast in running for a seat on the Security Council.
That's right.
You know, we got elected easily to the Security Council when we were there, and we have to, you know, we'll see what's going to happen to us. I think Chrystia Freeland is doing a good job as foreign affairs minister. She's certainly a star in this government, and she's certainly got her heart in the right place. Hell, I'm just getting started.
They don't like my questions, apparently.
Yeah.
No.
Look, Mandela, you're right. I had President Reagan against me on this, and Margaret Thatcher very much against me on Mandela. And you know, there's another question of leadership. What do you do when somebody like these are not insignificant people? Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher, I tell you, were pretty tough characters. And but I told Margaret, I said, listen, Margaret, I'm not a member of your government. I am the head of a sovereign government. And I am going to put Canada on the right side of history. And I'm telling you right now, you are putting the United Kingdom on the wrong side of history. She said, well, how do you know that? I said, I don't. But we're going to know if and when Mandela ever gets out of jail. Well, guess what happened? Mandela gets out of jail, finally, and he says publicly, Canada was right and the United Kingdom was wrong. But I got to tell you, what happens, I get Nicholas, my youngest son, to the second floor of 24 Sussex to watch Mandela come out of jail on that famous Sunday. I'd never seen him before. I've been working for him for 5 or 6 years to do this, and he gets out of jail. So I told Nicholas, I want you to see this because it's so important. The next day, in the morning, the Prime Minister's switchboard calls 24 Sussex. And they say, we want to talk to the Prime Minister. So I come on, and the switchboard, the Saint-Elzist, says to me, Prime Minister, we've got a guy here on the phone who says he's Nelson Mandela. I said, oh, Jesus. These are my friends from Baie-Comeau in the tavern, horsing around. You know. She said, well, I don't know, but he sounds a lot like the guy I heard on television last night. And she said, I don't think he's from Baie-Comeau. So I go on the line, and it's Mandela. And Mandela says, when I was in jail for all those years, I heard that a young conservative prime minister was elected in Canada. And then I heard that this fellow was going to make my cause and the cause of getting rid of apartheid in South Africa the #1 foreign policy priority of his government. And you did. And here I am out of jail. So I'm calling to tell you that I would like to make my first speech as a free man to a free parliament in a free country in Canada. So I said, well, would you like me to send you a plane this afternoon? Or would tomorrow morning be okay? So anyway, he came and he made this fabulous speech at the House of Commons. But make certain you don't think, Mandela had a great sense of humor. And I'll tell you this anecdote, which is not widely known, but it took place in Harare in Zimbabwe, when I was meeting with the African Commonwealth heads of government in Zimbabwe. And we had agreed to help finance Mandela's activities after he was out of jail as well, to help with the convention that was going to write the Constitution and all, not for partisan activities. But we put up a lot of money to help him with this constitutional thing that took a number of years and so on. So I'm having lunch with him, and there's, I think, Joe Clark, and Joe, who was terrific on this file, on every file. Joe was terrific. And Stanley Hart, who was my chief of staff at the time, was there. And Mandela is there with Thabo Mbeki, who became president after him, and Oliver Tambo, who was the head of the ANC in exile. So we're chatting and so on. We get to the end of the lunch, and Mandela says, Brian, I've got just one more thing to ask you. What are my chances of getting more money from you? I said, oh, Jesus, Nelson, I'm broke. We're in a recession. I mean, if I give away any more money that we don't have, they're going to lynch me by the time I get back to Canada. Well, he said, I'm just trying to get over the hurdle, and we're almost there. And you know, could you help me one? I said, all right, well, we'll do it one more time, but this is the last time because we don't have it anymore. Oh, God, he said, that's great. How much do you need? He said, $10 million. I said, all right. We'll do that. We'll send you $10 million. He looks at me. He stands up. The door is there. He gets up, heading to the door, and he turns around as if he's going to speak to the General Assembly at the United Nations. There's only 6 of us in the room. And Mandela says, Brian Mulroney, you are a great prime minister. Canada is the most generous country in the world. $10 million more. By the way, Brian, could you make that in U.S. funds? So he was pretty practical.
But I think it speaks to, something that people around the world are craving. It's this dearth of leadership that we don't see. We don't see the Thatchers and the Reagans or the Mulroneys anymore. And I think that speaks to when someone like yourself talks about these issues that were there was so much gravitas to it, there was so much leadership that was required, but a lot of risk as well.
Well, if you're guided by public opinion polls, you're dead as a doornail in history.
Well, these days, Prime Minister, it's under social media.
Well, you see, you've got me at a disadvantage because I don't have a clue what social media is. You know, I've got grandchildren who keep me informed on what it means. But no, I acknowledge that, look, for example, I've said publicly that Justin Trudeau had a much more difficult job than I did in negotiating free trade because I dealt with Reagan and Bush and Clinton. These were great gentlemen. They loved Canada. They understood Canada. I mean, they were tough and hard bargainers, but they were a delight to deal with. Justin didn't have that. Mm-hmm. He had a much tougher hombre down there, and so I had a lot of sympathy for him. But you're right, so that's important, the people you have to deal with at a given point in time, and what the world agenda it turns out to be when you're there, which defines the role for you. Because Canada is not a superpower. And it's important for the Prime Minister of Canada to realize that he's not President of the United States, but he's not leading a toothpick nation either. Mm-hmm. He's leading a powerful, impressive nation, respected and admired around the world as, in terms of quality of life and human achievement, probably the greatest nation in the world. But we don't have a big military, and we don't have an economy the size of the United States that allows them to do things that we can't do. But we can do a lot of other things. And it's important that the leader of our country understand what those are. And when it happens, you've got to pounce, and you've got to lead. And say, well, you know, this is unpopular. I mean, there are members of my government around here, you know, I don't give a goddamn if it's unpopular. It's the right thing for Canada to do. Can you imagine how popular I was when I went to caucus and said we're going to bring in the GST? I could see them looking around at themselves, saying, I think he's lost it. And they said, he's going to tax food, which we didn't do. But I mean, to put in but where would we be today without the proceeds from that? Country would be bankrupt the way they've been spending money. But the GST has, and it's not widely known, the GST is indispensable for the success of free trade. Free trade is designed to enhance our exports, thereby creating jobs and wealth at home by selling products into this fantastic market. Prior to this, you talk about leadership. Prior to this, as Ernie knows, because he was the Minister of Finance as well, prior to this, there was a 13.5% manufacturer sales tax buried in the product. So you had a manufacturer in Mississauga selling skis, let's say, into the United States. Couldn't get past the border very much because there was a 13.5% addition to it. It was secret, it was buried in the product. So for 63 years, royal commissions of various kinds had recommended to the federal government to get rid of this thing. It was crippling our exports. But now it was worse for me because I had just negotiated the greatest access to the American market anywhere. But I was crippled and inhibited by the tax system. So we looked at it with Michael Wilson, the greatest finance minister anybody ever was blessed with, I tell you. And we sat down and took a look at it, and he said, we're going nowhere, Prime Minister, unless we can do this. But he said, here's the problem. The 13.5% tax, which is crippling us, is secret, so Canadians don't know they're paying it. If we bring in a consumption tax, it's going to be visible, and they're going to run you out of town on a rail
That's right.
when they see that. But here's the beauty of it. You bring in a consumption tax at 7%, which we did, and because it's a consumption tax on the skis from Mississauga, where they had 11 employees out there, because it's a consumption tax, it comes off at the border. So your product, your skis are going in at a discount of 13.5%. So all of a sudden, the 11 employees in Mississauga become 111 employees in Mississauga. That's how Canada's economy is now run, because of that. But I want to tell you, I paid for that in purgatory time and time again. The worst punishment of all was some people thought I was stupid enough not to understand it. Because if I had been bright, I wouldn't have done it. Well, there's the difference between popularity and achievement. You want to be popular? You don't do this. And for 63 years, Canadian prime ministers refused to do it because they were talked out of it. Well, thank God for Michael Wilson and his colleagues. They supported me in this, and we went ahead and did it. Now, did we pay for it? Yeah, we did, and I did too. But I look back on it today. You remember the election in 1993? I'll spare you any names. But one guy was campaigning, said, elect me, I'm going to hax the tax.
Who could that have been?
I went into a restaurant the other day and I ran into Chrétien in Montreal. I said, Jesus, Jean, thank God for you. And he said, what do you mean? I said, well, I just had a wonderful meal here with Mila. No tax, no GST. Thank God you got rid of it. He said, I don't think I did. You'd be damn sure you didn't. And so they were going to get rid of free trade. Remember that? Mm-hmm. They were going to get rid of the GST. I privatized Air Canada, Petro-Canada, de Havilland, and 28 others, and took 100,000 people off the payroll of the government of Canada with privatization. The deregulation, we got rid of the National Energy Program, which paralyzed Western Canada, that Mr. Trudeau had brought in. It was like they took $80 billion out of the Treasury of Alberta. Why do you think there's alienation in Alberta? And why do you think Justin has trouble? He didn't do anything. He's paying for the sins of his father in this regard. The same way Caroline's paying for mine.
I think that's the perfect note to end on, because I did get a question, who is your favorite child?
Yeah.
Signed CM. I'm proud to say my friend Caroline, the Attorney General of Ontario, is a dear friend, so great legacy for you. I wish we had another day, and I think this audience has enjoyed everything that you've had to say, hung on every word. It was an honor and it was a pleasure. Ladies and gentlemen, the Right Honourable Brian Mulroney, Canada's 18th Prime Minister.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, thank you. Come on over here, dear. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Well, that was really a special lunch. Ms. Mulroney, on behalf of the Canadian Club of Toronto, thank you on two levels. First of all, thank you for sharing time with us today and taking us back to the time when you were Prime Minister and some of the challenges you faced and some of the things that you accomplished. It's so special to hear about it from the person who did it and who led it. And I don't know about all of you in the room, but it certainly reminded me how proud I am to be Canadian. So thank you very much in that first level for that. And I think, secondly, I think we all owe you a thank you for everything you've done for the country, leading us through, as you said, leadership matters tremendously. And you mentioned some of the inflection points as a country that you led us through, and some of the impacts that you had. And I know there was many more, and if we'd had more time, I'm sure we could have gone into those as well. But suffice it to say that you've had a tremendous impact on the country that has impacted all of us in this room. And I think on behalf of everyone in the room and beyond, a big thank you for everything you've done and how you showed leadership during your time as Prime Minister and afterwards. And a thank you to Adrian as well for facilitating the conversation. I know that you spoke to a lot of people and did a lot of digging and homework to prepare for that, and it really showed. So Adrian, thank you very much, and to the Sun as well. Just before we conclude, I'll tell you about some upcoming events that we have later this month. First of all, we host an evening event with the editor-in-chief of The Advocate, America's oldest LGBT magazine, Zach Stafford. That's tomorrow. And then on Tuesday the 18th, we have the Executive Vice President, Retail of Canadian Tire, Alan McDonald, who will be at the podium as well. We hope you can attend both of those events. Just before we close, I'd like to thank our generous sponsors once again, Archer Daniels Midland Company, Leuna, Norton Rose Fulbright, and Power Corporation of Canada. Thank you once again. And also a thank you to MediaEvents.ca, Canada's online event space, and VVC for live streaming today's event. And of course, thanks to all of you and our webcast viewers for joining us. It was a very special lunch. Thank you all for giving your time and being here today for it. I hope you're as inspired as I am to go make a difference in the great country of Canada. Thank you very much.